Hello my friends and welcome to the channel. This keyboard here is a Korg M1. Now if you're a keyboard player and a musician, you will know that this keyboard absolutely dominated the commercial music scene from about 1988 to 1995. Now this keyboard was manufactured in 1988 and it is the top selling synthesizer of all times. It sold over 250,000 units. That's 250,000 sales. Now, love it or loathe it, this instrument does have its place in commercial music history. In fact, a lot of the records of that time, whether they be commercial or underground, you will hear presets from this keyboard on those records. Now, it doesn't have many presets built into it. But why are we talking about this keyboard in the context of a Gary Numan Ade Fenton video? Well, my friends, there's a good reason for it. Watch this. Sounds slightly familiar? Well, there's a good reason for that, and that is because that is the sound that Gary Numan claimed for himself. Now, it's not edited, it's not tweaked. Gary Numan has taken this straight off the Korg M1. What's fascinating about Gary sort of claiming that sound is the fact that if you look at the fact that the Korg M1 sold 250,000 units all over the world, it was on pretty much every hit record between 1988 and 1995. So how did Gary manage to choose a sound that no one had used before? That baffles me, because there are not a lot of sounds on this. In fact, I will do another video later on this keyboard in depth. But I just want you to know that that sound, which is now the iconic Numan sound, comes from this keyboard, the Korg M1. In fact, when you turn this on its default position, the very first sound that comes up is this sound called Universe. And that's this one. Familiar sounding as well? That's because Gary Numan used this keyboard is all over Sacrifice. And in fact, when we go to this program mode here, preset number 90, Beauty, that is the sound. That is the sound that defines Gary Numan, and it is the sound of Sacrifice, Exile, and Pure, and it kind of crept into Jagged a little bit as well. And that is the reason why I'm telling you about this sound, and that is purely for context, because in part 2 of this series now, which is the Ade Fenton Special Part 2, Ade and I will be talking about that particular sound. It's the sound of Numan, isn't it? Anyway, let's jump into this part 2 of the Ade Fenton special. If it's your first time here, hit subscribe, leave your comments at the end of this video, and just introduce yourself and enjoy it. Part 3 will be out soon. Enjoy the video. Hi guys, and welcome to Geek Talk, where we talk deep and geek about pianos, keyboards, synthesizers, and music production. And this is part 2 of my exclusive Ade Fenton special. If you've not seen part 1, look in the description below to see part 1 before you come back to this. Ade, right, so we could be here all day, but let's just pick up where we left in part 1. We spoke about the fact that a lot of the albums where I thought they were real drums, they weren't. They were in fact programmed by your good self on the player.
Sort of half played in on the drum pad, and then, as I say, tied it up where I've played badly or whatever.
And then so you say you send them to Richie?
Sometimes I'll send something to Richie and just say, "Oh, just cast an eye over this. Just let me know if it sounds, doable." Sometimes, and then he'll say. Most of the time he'll say, yeah, it sounds great, and then sometimes he'll say, like I mentioned about the Chosen, you'd need 8 arms to play that, but you take one of them out and it loses all that nuttiness.
I think that is kind of accepted, but I think once again, most people won't recognize it. Joe Bloggs is not going to recognize that. But I just think we, the producer, we're quite conscious of the fact that, is this how a real drummer is going to do it? But I think because of the nature of this music, because it's very, otherworldly, you need to throw that out the window and just go, well, if it sounds good, it sounds good.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Something that you've spoke about just before we were recording here, and it's something that I'm very excited about, and I wasn't aware about, is that you're going to be remixing a lot of the previous albums. Oh, is that right?
No.
Yeah.
So we're not remixing them, we're re-recording.
Re-recording
them.
So re-recording from scratch, except for Jagged.
Jagged is going to be mixed again. Nathan's going to take a look at it with me, just to see what happened, using all the original parts, nothing new. But Sacrifice, Exile and Pure, they are completely re-recorded. So, but I've wanted to be very authentic to the originals. So, M1 Beauty is still there. I haven't got rid of it, because otherwise it wouldn't sound like Pure, or it wouldn't sound like Exile or Sacrifice. But they sound like the original versions, but you can now hear absolutely everything going on. Gary's voice sounds clear, and I'm really pleased with how it's gone.
We're going to talk about the M1 Beauty. In fact, guys, I'm going to do a video on the M1 Beauty. It was David Brooks when I was interviewing him.
Yeah.
And because we did notice that at some point in the production that sound disappeared, and I believe it was you who said, Gary, we need to stop using this sound.
The thing is, I love that sound. It's a beautiful sound. It is such a lovely sound. But Gary, I think, was using it on Sacrifice, Exile, and Pure, and then on the demos for Jagged, I used them again. And on that album, I said maybe we should start phasing it out, because it's identifiable with that particular phase. Those three albums kind of belong together, don't they? And so let's start phasing it out. And of course, because he mixed Jagged, he got away with it's his album. He got away with just using. He got away with using it. It's just sneaking it in, But that's fine. I don't mind that.
I can see why. I was talking to David Brooks. I can see why he uses that sound, because it's a preset straight off the Korg M1, and it just works because it's. And the funny thing is that sound is, although it's a preset from the M1, and the M1 was, everyone used it, so the sounds were easily identifiable. The problem is, Gary has made that sound his own.
Exactly.
No one else can use that, because they're going to go, that's a Numan sound. Even though it is a preset from the Korg M1.
Yeah, look, Gary still uses it 8 times out of 10. Gary uses it as his writing tool still. And so some of the demos will still come in with Beauty or whatever. And then that's totally fine, because now we're sort of past that stage where it's, the joke, we're past the sort of joke phase of it now, but he uses it as a writing tool. I think on the Intruder, actually, he used it less, because I think he said that it was kind of, when he was using it with the songs on Intruder, it was sort of pushing some of the songs in a particular direction. Songs like Now and Forever, for example, it works beautifully, and sometimes, if on Now and Forever, I think it was on the demo, and it sounded lovely. It sounded really nice. So I kind of made a sound that had that kind of choral thing, and to sort of replace it, if because we couldn't. It's not like we couldn't use Beauty again, because it's a shit sound. We couldn't use Beauty again because it had been used on every album in the 90s and the early 2000s, and so it'd sound like we're gone backwards a little bit, So yeah,
I can, as I said, we'll get off the Beauty sound, but I can see why he uses it, because knowing the way Gary works on one of his, I follow him on Patreon, and I know he sits by a piano and he very much sketches out the melody, and that's why a lot of his songs have got he'll be singing the melody, but there'll be a keyboard part playing that melody, and that's kind of like that worked a lot with Beauty, for example. One stranger, one heartbeat, one love is for. So that's the way he writes. So I think it's just very comfortable. But yeah, the Beauty sound. Glad we've lost it finally, although we do love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just. I'm just thinking in terms of workflow now, because you must be very, very busy, because you're obviously. Let's get on to some of the stuff you're doing now. You're doing a lot of theme music for
film scores.
Film scores.
Yeah. It's my current project, or almost finished actually, is a score for a boxing documentary. It's a score by the same guy, Steve Reed, who did Android in La La Land. And he's done a documentary about Larry Holmes and Muhammad Ali fighting in the late 70s and the sort of beginning of the end for Ali. And you know, for me, it was a challenge because it's different kind of music, you know. But I've really enjoyed it. It's been great, and I love the subject matter. So it you know, for me, it was an easy thing to say yes to.
You're composing it.
Yeah, I've
that's right.
All the music for it. But I've been doing it with Tim Slater, who plays bass in Gary's band. He's my composing partner. You know, he's an unbelievable musician, and so for to be working with him again, you know, a really close friend. So Tim will come here for a couple of days, and we'll just mess around for you know, he'll bring his cello or his double bass or whatever, and we'll just make stuff, you know, and then we'll see what fits, and then score, you know, score to picture. But you know, the first time scoring to picture that I did actually was From Inside, which is the soundtrack I did with Gary. So even though that was a sort of apocalyptic, animated apocalyptic film, that was kind of, you know, that was kind of me stepping into that world, you know, and I loved it. You know, it's like a double reward.
I can just think now. This is obviously a bit random, but you know, when I think of boxing and I think of your work, I'm interested to hear it, because I doubt you're going to go down the. You're not going to go down that route.
We've not done any of that.
I should not think. No, absolutely. Any solo projects that you're sort of working? Because you released. I remember you and Gary did a collaboration. I forget the song. It was very, very dark. It was very, very creepy and scary. Okay. What was that one?
The Leather Sea, perhaps.
Yeah.
I mean, I did an album 2000. Crikey, I don't even know when. Which is, I think I might have mentioned to you before, is one of those that I kind of listen to now. You know, like, you know, when you watch a horror film and you're hiding behind the cushion because you're scared of what you're going to see. That's how I can't even listen to it anymore. But I did actually listen to one of the tracks from that the other day, and I thought, that sounds all right. Actually, it sounds better than I thought it would. But I don't know. You know what? I'm so busy doing the film stuff and the garage stuff and other projects as well, producing for other people. I don't really have any desire. You know, I don't have a desire to be an artist in my own right. You know, I don't know. I don't even think I did when I released Artificial Perfect, to be honest. It was just something. I just split up with someone, and it, you know, I found it a really cathartic is the wrong word, because wasn't really that big a drama, to be honest. But it was great to use those feelings to write some music. I'm sure I will do it though. I don't know when, and I don't know what desire I've got to do it. If I do, it would be a collaboration with someone else. I'd love to do it with, say, Gazelle Twin. You know, I'd love to do something with her. But I don't think I'll be doing anything, you know, that is under my name again. I don't particularly have any desire to do so, and I'm quite happy kind of doing the film stuff and obviously working for Gary and working for other people doing stuff.
Yeah. Well, talking about workflow and stuff, you've obviously mentioned that obviously you've just finished Intruder. Gary's talking about Intruder Part 2, you know, at some point. But then, of course, you're going to re-record Sacrifice, Exile, and Pure.
Well, we've already done Sacrifice and Pure.
You've actually done it?
They're finished, yeah.
Oh, right.
They're just waiting for Nathan to mix them.
Oh, really?
Exile, I've done about half of it. we had to put a slight stop to it, well, big stop to it, because obviously of Intruder, and then because of the pandemic. So I was due to fly over to Gary's at some point, either before we started Intruder or whatever, to re-record the vocals for Exile. So I'm about halfway through it. Yeah.
I see. I know, because this has all been quite hush-hush, quite a secret, or is it?
Not really. I mean, I think Gary's mentioned it on his Patreon, and we haven't talked about it that much. Not because it's a big secret, but because we've got Intruder to talk about.
Exactly. Yeah, you've got to keep the focus on one thing. Now, how will these things be released? Will they be repackaged?
We don't know yet.
Yeah. No, you don't know that.
Yeah. I mean, they'll be. They're re-records, so they'll be repackaged in some way. But get that obviously down to Gary. Gary manages himself, so he. I'm sure he'll be having conversations with different people about how to release those things. I don't know at this stage, to be honest.
Yeah, because I think with things like that as well, is there's so much focus on an album. You don't want to sort of bring these things out and murky the waters kind of thing. But then again, I suppose that's not really the case in Gary, because he's got such a hardcore following. So they're quite specific and they understand.
Yeah, but what you want to, yes, but what you wouldn't want to do is take any of the focus away from Intruder. And Intruder is obviously new, and those albums aren't new.
Yeah.
So Intruder 2, when we start it, that'll be the focus. So the hope is that in between Intruder and Intruder 2, we'll get Exile finished.
That is interesting, because obviously Gary is very big about doing just new material. So I'm interested to see why he'd want to readdress these. Was it something that someone recommended to him, or was it just...
No, not really. Yeah, it was a conversation that me and him had, and I think he recognises that, though, with the sort of sound quality that we're achieving now with Splinter, Savage, and Intruder, I think it was like, wouldn't it be great to hear those albums as hi-fi and as big and everything, and then we were like, why don't we just try seeing what happens? We'll just re-record, let's just try Sacrifice, and so I think we started by doing Desire. I think was the first track that we did, and it worked out great. It's like, you can absolutely, drums are so powerful. That'll be another track that you think I've done live.
But the beauty piano remains in those.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm glad it does, because
it's a key part.
It's a massively key part of it. It drives those three records, and the religious content of all of those three albums is almost kind of held up by the beauty sound, because it's such an angelic.
It is
pure. I was going to say pure. That's cheesy. It's such an angelic choral sound. The lyrical content of those albums, I think it needs to be there.
No, I'm actually, as a fan, I'm happy to hear you doing that, because funny enough, it must have been maybe about 8 months or a year ago, I listened to Exile and I think Sacrifice, and I thought, how do I say this diplomatically? I don't mean this any disrespect, but I thought they sound like demos, particularly by today's standards. So and of course we understand the history. Gary was struggling, so he put that together himself. I think he did the vocals on an SM58. It was really done on a budget, but we can't compare it to what you've just done. But I mean, it's night and day. So it would be nice to hear those records brought up to the standard. Yeah,
and I've made it very clear as well that the last thing I would want is for it to be an Ade Fenton remix album of those albums, or Ade Fenton interpretations of them. It's not that at all. This is no different to Gary sending me a demo, albeit with Pure, for example, being a very developed one, and it's far more than a demo. That Pure, it's a great album. But it's the actual sort of sonic quality is what we're talking about. The songs are the same, the instrumentation is the same, albeit there's a lot less loops used. There's much more clarity in the drums, and there are some new parts, obviously, but the parts are in keeping with what those albums were about.
Yeah.
You know, you can just hear everything going on, and it sounds exactly the same as listening to Pure, but now it's on steroids.
It's pure on steroids. Okay. Right, Ade. So Gary has just obviously now he's gone back to California, but whilst he was here in the UK, he they did the rehearsals for for this live streaming thing. So obviously you provide the backing tracks. So you go to the rehearsals and so that you obviously listen and see if there's any changes that need.
Yeah, that happened a little bit. The mix engineers will send me the stems from the finished album. I then have control over all the multi-track and I'm able to take stuff out. So, for example, Richie he came over to the studio. He took samples of any of the, if it's a 909 snare or a big fat kick or whatever, where he's not using live drum sounds. On Betrayed, for example, there's a big old kick drum, electronic kick drum, and a sort of really snappy kind of 909 sounding snare. So he would take those so he could play those live. Me and David Brooks would then have a conversation. Okay, what are you going to play live and what should we leave on the track? Because obviously he's only got two hands. Same with Steve Harris, same with Tim Slade. So we have those conversations. I then prepare a backing track, send it over to David. David then lets me know how it's gone. We tweak and tweak and tweak and tweak. I've ended up doing, probably 4 or 5 days worth of, not all day, every day, but them coming back and saying, oh, this is not quite working or that's not quite working. Then I go to rehearsals and see what it sounds like. That's kind of what happens.
Just sort of speaking about David Brooks and the keyboards, there was that incident where David's dad had the health scare and you had to jump in at a moment's notice. Well, that must have been quite stressful for you.
It kind of was, yeah, but it was mainly stressful because I was so worried about my friend. I guess that one of them was in Bournemouth and one of them was in Bristol. So Bristol just down the road, so that was easy. And Bournemouth is only like an hour a bit's drive or whatever. So I really enjoyed it. It was just lovely to be back in the band again for a bit.
Yes, because you were on tour for the Splinter tour. Is that right?
I can't remember. I was on tour for a lot of those. Pleasure Principle and Replicas, I think I did. Dead Sun Rising, I definitely did. I remember almost breaking my neck on big noise transmission live because it's such a headbanger. So it's like
you were shaking.
Yeah. But anyway, yes, I was in the band for a long time, and I miss it. I miss it massively. I miss the camaraderie. I miss being with, they're all my best friends. I miss it massively. But since sort of having a kid and the travelling side of it, I'm not sure. Even if Eddie doesn't need me, he got David. But even if he wanted someone else, I'm not sure what I'd say. I really. Being with them would be fantastic. Yeah. But not being with my little boy would be awful. You know what I mean? So it's.
How old is your little boy now?
He's 5. 5,
yeah. So you would have been on tour before he was born.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see. Yeah. Children. And here's a question, just sort of like a different. How has becoming a father changed you?
It's just the balance of work life. Well, yeah, I've got a lot less time, but it's it's just having that balance really. When I didn't have anything else, any other distractions, I just work constantly, pretty much. But now I don't. I still work really hard, and when I need to, I'll work 6.5 days a week if I need to. If I've got a deadline, that focus is still there, but when I don't need to, then I'm happy not to. I don't feel guilty about it anymore.
Well, this brings it nicely on to work practice. You obviously are you're an introvert, aren't you?
I don't know if I'm an introvert.
You're a social introvert.
Quite possibly. Yeah, I don't know really.
I'm like that as well.
If you get me a party, I'm definitely not.
No, I was like that as well. I've always been an introvert, but I think life forces you to become, otherwise you're just a recluse.
Yeah.
But you're quite happy to spend hours and hours in the studio. So on a typical working day, are you are you very sort of disciplined? You coming here every day at a set time? Or
Yeah.
How does that work?
8:30 in the morning, and then have dinner usually around 5:30. But I'll usually go and play with my little boy for an hour before dinner, and then I'm back in here at probably 7:30, and then I'll work usually until about 9:30.
And that is that every day?
Every day.
Every single day?
Every day.
So you see, guys, this is what it takes to be successful. I think this is something I think a lot of people don't understand and this is getting a little bit philosophical. Everyone we look up to who is successful, we look at them and they go, oh, they're successful. But behind every successful person is this story of someone that works and grinds. And yes, it's the story of Gary Numan, someone who's gotten up and, fallen, has fallen so many times. So you're saying is you're in here 8:30 every morning, you stop at 5 for dinner, you come back at 7:30, and then you work till...
Usually 9:30, but that's if I've got the work on, which is most of the time I do, thankfully, and 2, if it's happening. If it's not happening, or if I'm sat at the keyboard, or if I'm twiddling and nothing's happening, or if I'm not feeling it, then I won't.
I see.
I'll take the dog out or something. I've learnt the hard way, probably, not to push it. If it's just not happening, it's not happening.
That is true, and I think that's a problem with a lot of geeks. It's that sitting, sort of hammering away at something and then losing perspective. That
happens quite easily. I came into the studio on Friday last week, and I sat here and I just thought, what, I just don't want to work today. I didn't. That isn't me being like trying to shirking work, because that's the last thing I would ever do. But it's just like just wasn't feeling it. I need to feel it.
That's right, and you. Fortunately, you do feel it most of the time? Or are there just times
absolutely.
You don't?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I've also learnt to do is I will quite often now, before I would start a track and I would finish a track, then I'd move on to the next one. I don't do that anymore. I'll usually start a track, get to a certain point, think, okay, I'm going to leave that now. I've had enough of that one for a bit, and then I'll go and work on something else. And then I'll probably work on a third track. Then by the time I've gone back to the first track I was working on, it sounds fresh again, and I've got a fresh perspective on it. Now I know what it needs.
Yeah.
Now I know what it needs. And quite often, if I reach a point where I go, God, I just don't know what this needs anymore, just leave it. Push it to one side. If the deadline's not tomorrow, push it to one side, go and work on something else. Even if working on something else is, dusting or cleaning or whatever. Or whatever it might be, working on a different track, or just not even having a purpose, just making cool noises, go and do that for a bit, because when you go back, it will almost always sound fresh.
I think that's I learned this in art in high school when I was doing art. Our art teacher, Mrs. Byrne, God rest her soul, she used to say, when you're drawing a picture, if you paint, they're very much the same thing. Some people, they would, let's say you're drawing a house in a landscape. People would start, they'd draw the house and they'd finish the house. Then no. She goes, you start the house, then you move to this. You're kind of sketching it out.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the same with a record. If you're working a record, I feel the best thing is don't finish one track. It's jump from one to the next, and you get this flow going, and you get elements.
I do have a method though. When I start a track, whether it's for Gary or for whoever, I'll get the parts. And I will do the vocals come first. I'll sort the vocals out first. So if I've got so I'll comp all the best takes. Usually bounce those down to audio. The best takes
with full effects and everything on them?
No. Just completely dry.
Yeah.
Once I've selected the best takes, then I'll bring those bouncers back into Logic. And then I'll do all the editing. So it'll be the tuning, the timing, everything, tighten everything up. And then I'll start applying effects to the vocals. Sort of got a tried and trusted vocal chain, with compressors and EQ and whatever. Yeah. And then the drums will come after that. And then after the drums, I'll get a basic idea of where I think it should be with the drums and the vocals. And then I'll start adding the bass, then I'll start adding the synths, and then I'll go back to the vocals, and then I go back to the drums, and then that's how it all the picture starts to be painted.
To gel,
Yeah.
Right, so that's interesting because I think for a lot of, especially the geeks in my community who are like fundamentally musicians and stuff, they always start off with the track, it's the drums, the bass, and I found this is the problem with a lot of producers is, they always start with the music and then they kind of shoehorn the vocal in afterwards. I personally have always found start with the vocal, and that's like the focal point, because everything. It doesn't matter how much effort and intricacies you've put into the track. Most people are going to listen to the vocal. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't care about those little details, but I just want to sort of coming into your workflow. So you say you start off with a vocal, that's the most important thing. Then you bring in the drums because that's the rhythmic element, and then bring in the bass. Is that usually your approach?
That's usually my building block approach.
Then,
yeah, I mean, but what you just said, that is half of the reason. One, it's a Gary Numan song. It isn't an Ade Fenton production. It's a Gary Numan song.
Yeah, so he's got to be the star.
That's it. My job is to make his songs as good as I think they can be, and that he's happy with. That is my job. It's not about what cool drum patterns can Ade come up with. It's about what's the best thing we can do together. And so the vocal is very important. It's the centre part of it. It's the centre of everything. That is one reason. The other reason is I cannot bear just starting a track if the vocals aren't sounding right without processing or whatever, it just bugs me, and I just think, do you know what? I've tried it before, and I just go, sorry, I'm just going to go and do the vocal. I'm going to edit all the vocals so that they sound brilliant. And I think that if the vocals sound brilliant, then you know what you're building around, because everything else is about the song,
It's like making a good chicken stew. If you're using good organic chicken, then the rest is just spices and ingredients.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Follow us for more recipes. Okay, so let's just talk about Intruder. Now I'm going to make a shout out to my wingman, Brett Wallace, who I'll bring on later. Thank you to Brett Wallace for introducing me to Gary Numan. So it's because of him that this is all happening. He had a good question for you. What's your favourite songs on Intruder? If you're allowed to say that.
Yeah, of course, I absolutely am, I think. I mean, there's two, what do I enjoy listening to and what did I enjoy making? Luckily, they're the same three. I Am Screaming, The Gift, and The Chosen. The Chosen because it is absolutely mental. And Gary's remit for it was, I just want it to be layer upon layer upon layer. And just when you think it can't get any more mental, another layer appears and it just keeps getting more mental. For me, that is just, that is the perfect, if anybody could give me the perfect recipe for doing a track for them, that's it. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And, to be sat in here and, when he sent me the demo, it had all of the, like all that bass line was there, but he just wanted it, more. And it was, I loved it. We did that track really quickly, even though it's so, I think there's about 130 audio tracks on that particular mix, including buses, so it's full. It's up to, there's no room left for anything else. Love that one, and it's to hear it perform live at the streaming show as well. It's bonkers. Love it. I'm Screaming because I enjoyed. I with that one, I kind of enjoyed deconstructing Gary's demo and sort of going, okay, because all Gary's demo at the time was all half speed, and it felt like at some point it should pick up a little bit, and so the idea with that one was start it really gentle. It's really gentle to start with. One or two nods to Cry the Clock Said from Dan's, because it felt like it worked with the CL78, albeit a very sort of bent out of shape CL78, if you like, with lots of tape saturation on it and distortion, and then to actually experiment with it, going into full speed, if you like, towards the end. I enjoyed that, experimenting with that track massively. And The Gift, just brilliant song. That was just an absolute joy to produce that track. And the demo that Gary sent me, all the drum machine groove was there. That was Gary's, built on that. And then we really worked on that particular track. Lots of others, but particularly The Gift. It was we talked a lot during the making of that one. I think originally the vocal melody in the chorus was only going to be an instrumental chorus, and then Gary had tried doing a vocal to it, but it was in when he's writing, he sometimes does some like mumbo jumbo kind of stuff just to get an idea of how syllables flow. So he'd done this thing and everything. I went, oh, that sounds fucking great. Let's try doing that with lyrics and stuff. And so it really came together. We even though we weren't able to be together physically, we were on FaceTime to one another. Just going, that works brilliantly, and what do you think about this? And then when Gorkum sent his Yabahar for it was a bit annoying because it came quite late, the Yabahar, and I don't mean annoying as in anything else other than the fact that I'd got this version of it and it was like, it sounds great, sounds good. And then Gorkum sends the Yabahar and it was just fucking incredible, and then I've got to try and fit it into the mix, so I was like taking stuff out, going, all right, and then I'm going, oh God, that's when you just go, right, I'm going to leave that on for a bit, I'm going to go and work on Now and Forever, and then come back to it, and it's fresh again, and that and to have Gorkum's, the bit where it takes off before the instrumental section, just before the second chorus, when his Yabahar goes da-da-da-da-da, and it's just like, it fills the room, and they're the moments that you really kind of live for, as a person that makes or produces music.